Nathan Carter adjusted his tie, his fingers moving with practiced ease as he checked his reflection in the glass wall of his office. He sighed, stretching his shoulders before glancing at the clock. 6:45 p.m. The day had been long. 8 back-to-back interviews for the senior strategist position at Carter & Associates, his fast-growing marketing firm. He had listened to rehearsed pitches, scanned through embellished resumes, and endured hours of corporate small talk. But now, at last, it was almost over. Just one more candidate. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Claire, peeked in. "Mr. Carter, the final candidate is here." Nathan barely looked up, already mentally halfway out the door. "Send them in," he said, flipping through the next resume with little interest. He had stopped caring about names at this point. His mind was set on getting home, pouring himself a whiskey, and finally unwinding. The door swung open and time stopped. The resume slipped from his fingers, fluttering onto the desk. Nathan's usually composed demeanor froze as he took in the woman standing before him. Her sharp green eyes wide with shock. Her perfectly styled hair, now slightly trembling as if she were standing in a storm. The crisp blazer and pencil skirt she wore did little to hide the way she suddenly seemed so small. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Her hand trembled slightly around the folder she held, her professional mask cracking under the weight of recognition. Emily, his ex-wife. A ghost from a past he had spent years burying. Nathan's heartbeat steadied as years of bitterness, betrayal, and buried emotions fought to surface. But outwardly, he remained composed. He was no longer the struggling entrepreneur she had discarded years ago. Now, he was in control. Emily swallowed hard, visibly flustered. I didn't know you worked here," she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. Nathan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His sharp gaze studied her like a puzzle he had already solved. "Worked here," he echoed, a slow smirk forming. He let the silence stretch, watching as realization dawned in her eyes. Then he delivered the final blow. "Emily, I own this company." Her face paled. Nathan felt a strange, quiet satisfaction watching the emotions flicker across her features. Shock, confusion, realization, and finally, sheer panic. He let the silence stretch, allowing her to sit in the discomfort. Finally, she found her voice. I had no idea," she said, shifting nervously. Nathan arched an eyebrow. "Didn't you?" Emily's fingers clenched around her folder. I wouldn't have come if I knew. And yet, here you are." The weight of the moment pressed down on both of them. Years ago, she had made her choice. She had walked away from him when he was nothing, leaving him for someone richer, more established. She had wanted luxury, status, things he couldn't give her at the time. And now she was sitting across from him, applying for a job in a company that bore his name. Oh, the irony. Nathan inhaled slowly, then picked up the resume from his desk, flipping through it with feigned interest. "Shall we begin?" Emily took a shaky breath, visibly trying to compose herself. She adjusted her posture, straightened her shoulders, and forced a smile. "Of course," she said, her voice laced with forced confidence. Nathan smirked slightly, but didn't comment on her obvious discomfort. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Have a seat." Emily hesitated for half a second before lowering herself into the leather chair. Nathan leaned back, studying her with a detached, analytical gaze. "So, Emily," he drawled, tapping a finger against the resume. "You're applying for the senior strategist position. Impressive background, at least on paper." She swallowed, shifting in her seat. "I have years of experience in marketing strategy. I'm confident I can bring—" Nathan held up a hand, cutting her off. "Spare me the rehearsed speech. Let's talk about something more interesting." He tilted his head. "Tell me, What made you leave your last job? Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the folder in her lap. She wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't a normal interview. The company downsized, she said carefully. They restructured and my position was eliminated. Nathan hummed, feigning interest. Downsized, huh? And before that? She hesitated again, just for a second, but Nathan caught it. I left voluntarily, she said quickly. For better opportunities. Nathan chuckled. Better opportunities. Interesting choice of words. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the desk. Kind of like how you left me for… What was his name again? Emily stiffened. Nathan, this isn't relevant. Oh, but I think it is. His voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. Because last time we spoke, you told me you were trading up, that you deserve someone with more money, more power, more stability. He let the words sink in before adding, Tell me, Emily, how did that work out for you? Her jaw tightened. She glanced away, her lips pressing together. That's personal. Nathan let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. You're right. It is personal. But then again, so is this. He gestured around the office. You see, Emily, I built all of this after you left. Every late night, every risk I took. It all led me here. You said I wasn't enough back then. But now, ironically, you're sitting across from me asking for a job. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. Shame, regret, anger. It was hard to tell. Emily took a deep breath, schooling her expression. I didn't come here to rehash the past, Nathan. I need this job. Nathan tilted his head. Why? She hesitated. Because you need the money, he interrupted. Because things didn't go as planned? Her silence was answer enough. Nathan smirked, tapping his fingers against the desk. He could play this game all night. All right, he said finally. Let's talk about your qualifications then. You've worked for some decent firms, but nothing spectacular. Your tenure at your last 2 jobs was short. Why's that? Emily's fingers clenched around the folder again. I had personal reasons. Nathan arched a brow. Personal reasons. He let the words hang in the air before leaning back, crossing his arms. So, let me get this straight. You left a stable marriage for better opportunities, but now you're here, needing a job. You worked at a couple of decent firms, but none of them kept you long. And you're looking for another, fresh start. Do I have that right? Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. Yes. Nathan sighed dramatically. Well, Emily, I have to say, you're not exactly selling yourself well here. He let the words sink in before adding, but hey, I'm feeling generous today. Let's continue. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a pen in her bag, trying to keep herself busy, but Nathan could see it. She was unraveling, and he wasn't done yet. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he observed Emily. She was clearly uncomfortable, shifting slightly in her seat, her fingers gripping the folder in her lap a little too tightly. He let the silence stretch, watching her squirm. Then he smiled. All right, Emily, let's get to the practical part of this interview. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick file, dropping it onto the desk with a loud thud. I want you to analyze this campaign and tell me how you'd improve it. Emily blinked, caught off guard. Right now? Nathan shrugged. You said you were experienced. Prove it. She swallowed hard, nodding as she reached for the file. The pages were dense with data, graphs, and charts. A real test of skill, no doubt. She flipped through them quickly, trying to absorb as much information as possible. Nathan watched her closely. She used to be sharp, confident. But now, she looked hesitant. Minutes ticked by. Emily finally looked up, clearing her throat. All right, this campaign has solid market research, but the execution is lacking. The target demographic isn't engaged properly, and the conversion rate is below industry standards. I would suggest. Nathan held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Wrong. Emily blinked. What? Nathan smirked. You're missing a key factor. Look again. She frowned, flipping back through the pages. I don't. Page 17, he said, tapping his finger on the desk. Emily quickly turned to the page and immediately froze. Her name was on it. It was a breakdown of one of the last campaigns she had worked on at her previous company. Her breath hitched. This was my project. Nathan tilted his head. Yes. And tell me, Emily, how did this campaign perform? She hesitated, because she knew the answer. It had failed. Spectacularly. The campaign had launched with high expectations, but poor engagement, strategies and mismanagement had led to disastrous results. She had tried to salvage it, but by then, it was too late. And now, Nathan had placed that failure right in front of her. She slowly exhaled. It didn't perform well. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Understatement of the year. Emily clenched her jaw. It wasn't entirely my fault. The budget was cut at the last minute, and there were internal issues that… Excuses, Nathan interrupted. You were in charge. The campaign flopped. End of story. Silence hung in the air. Emily swallowed her pride. I learned from it. Nathan studied her for a moment before nodding slightly. Good. Because failure isn't the issue. It's how you handle it. She let out a slow breath. So, does this mean I passed your test? Nathan smirked. Not yet, but you're still in the game. Emily felt a cold sweat forming on the back of her neck. This wasn't just an interview. It was a psychological game, one Nathan had designed to test her. And the worst part, she was losing. Nathan leaned forward, his gaze locked onto hers. Tell me something, Emily. Why do you really want this job? She swallowed. Because I need it. Nathan smirked. Not good enough. Everyone needs a job. I want to know why you're sitting in that chair, knowing damn well who I am, and still asking me for a chance. Emily's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. Because I'm good at what I do. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. You were good. Once. But now, I'm not so sure. That stung. He was testing her limits, seeing if she would break. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I made mistakes. I admit that. But I'm not that same person anymore. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Really? Because from where I'm sitting, I see the same woman who cheated on her husband and threw away a perfectly good life. Emily flinched as if he had slapped her. Her face went pale, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. So that was it. He wasn't just here to test her skills. He wanted to humiliate her. Her nails dug into her palms as she clenched her fists. That's personal. Nathan's expression didn't change. Everything is personal, Emily. Business, relationships, betrayal. You taught me that, remember? Silence. Emily's lips trembled, but she forced herself to keep her voice steady. If you called me here just to get revenge, then say it. Otherwise, either give me the job or let me walk out that door. Nathan studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. You're hired. Emily's breath caught in her throat. What? Nathan leaned back in his chair, looking smug. I said, you're hired. You start Monday. She stared at him, completely dumbfounded. This had to be a joke. But the look in Nathan's eyes told her he was completely serious. She had just stepped into his game, and now there was no turning back. Monday morning arrived faster than Emily expected. As she stepped into the grand lobby of Titan Marketing, she could feel the weight of every decision that had led her to this moment. The sleek glass walls, the modern decor, the polished marble, floors, everything screamed success, and Nathan owned it all. Her stomach twisted with nerves, but she forced herself to stay composed. She had survived worse. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. Good morning, Ms. Carter. Mr. Hayes asked me to show you to your office. Emily nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Lead the way." She followed the woman down a long hallway, her heels clicking against the pristine floors. Her new office was surprisingly spacious, with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. But before she could fully take it in, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Settling in already?" Emily turned. Nathan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking as effortlessly powerful as ever. Of course, he'd come to see how she was adjusting. She straightened her shoulders. "I was just about to get started," Nathan smirked, stepping inside. "Good. Let's not waste time then. Follow me." She followed him to the conference room, where a team of senior strategists sat waiting. Some glanced at her with curiosity, others with barely concealed amusement. They knew. They all knew. Nathan took his seat at the head of the table. "All right, team, let's get started. Carter, let's see what you can do." Emily hesitated for half a second before regaining her composure. "Of course." She pulled up the latest campaign data and launched into her analysis. She spoke with confidence, her voice steady, her mind sharp. This was her domain. This was where she thrived. But Nathan wasn't making it easy. Every time she made a point, he countered it. Every suggestion he questioned. He was pushing her, challenging her, testing to see if she would crack under pressure. She refused to break. After what felt like an eternity, the meeting ended. Emily exhaled quietly as the team filed out. But as she turned to leave, Nathan's voice stopped her. "Not bad, but you'll have to do better than that if you want to last here." Emily met his gaze. "I intend to." Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "We'll see, Carter. We'll see." As she walked back to her office, she realized something. This wasn't just a job. This was a war, and she had just stepped onto the battlefield. Emily wasn't a fool. She knew exactly what Nathan was doing. Every day at Titan Marketing felt like a carefully orchestrated mind game. Nathan would assign her the most demanding projects, set unrealistic deadlines, and make her jump through hoops just to prove herself. And yet, no matter how hard he pushed, she never faltered. She delivered. She over-delivered, and that infuriated him. But Emily also knew how to play this game. She had spent years in cutthroat environments, learning how to navigate corporate power, struggles. So when Nathan called her into his office one afternoon, she was ready. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. He sat behind his massive oak desk, fingers steepled together. "Carter, take a seat." She complied, crossing her legs, keeping her posture perfectly composed. Nathan leaned back. "Your recent campaign strategy for Nexus was impressive. You exceeded the projected engagement by 32%. Emily tilted her head slightly. "I'm glad you noticed. Was there anything else?" Nathan smirked. Always so impatient. He paused, then continued. "There's a company gala this Friday. You'll be attending?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "Will I?" "Yes," Nathan said smoothly. "It's important for you to integrate with the team." Emily wasn't naive. This wasn't about work. This was about power, about control. And she refused to let him dictate her moves. "I'll consider it," she said, standing up. Nathan's smirk didn't waver. "You do that, Carter. But remember, this is not an invitation. It's an expectation." She held his gaze. "Duly noted." Then she turned and walked out. Nathan thought he could control this game, but he was about to learn. Emily knew how to play it better. Emily knew this gala wasn't just about company networking. It was a test, a trap, a spectacle designed by Nathan to put her on display, to remind her of his dominance. But two could play this game. When Friday arrived, she didn't just attend, she made an entrance. Dressed in a sleek crimson gown that hugged her figure with effortless elegance, she stepped into the grand ballroom of the Astoria Hotel like she owned the place. Heads turned, conversations paused. Even the CEO, Mr. Langford, took a moment to admire her. And then, of course, there was Nathan. He stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand. watching her with the cold intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. His lips curled slightly, part amusement, part challenge. Emily didn't blink. She walked past him without hesitation, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. If he thought she would crumble under his scrutiny, he was. Or mistaken, Carter. Nathan's voice came from behind her. She turned, meeting his gaze head on. Nathan, she said smoothly, swirling the champagne in her glass. Enjoying the evening? Immensely. His smirk deepened. Especially now. Emily didn't react. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Nathan took a slow sip of his whiskey, then leaned in slightly. You look determined. I always am. Good. Because tonight isn't just about appearances. Emily arched a brow. Oh? What else is it about? Nathan's smirk didn't waver. A lesson in power. Before she could respond, Mr. Langford, the CEO, approached. Emily, just the person I wanted to see. Nathan stiffened slightly. Interesting. Langford smiled warmly. Your work with Nexus has been outstanding. In fact, we've been discussing potential leadership roles. I'd love to chat more about your vision for Titan marketing. Emily smiled. And just like that, the game shifted. Nathan may have invited her to the gala to test her. But tonight, she was the one winning. Nathan was seething. He masked it well, of course. A carefully controlled expression, a subtle tightening of his jaw. But Emily knew she had won tonight. For the first time since their tangled, complicated history had brought them back into each other's orbit, she was the one holding the power. And Nathan, he hated it. She took another sip of her champagne, savoring the taste of victory. But Nathan wasn't done. Enjoying yourself, Carter? His voice was smooth, calculated. You always did thrive on attention. Emily didn't flinch. Only when it's earned. He chuckled, shaking his head. You really think this changes anything? She tilted her head. Doesn't it? Nathan leaned in, his voice dropping lower. Let's be clear. This job, your success here, all of it. I allowed it. She held his gaze. And that's where you've always been wrong, Nathan. You never allowed me anything. You just underestimated me. For a split second, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Because deep down, he knew she was right. She didn't need him. Never had. The only difference now? She was proving it. Emily set her champagne flute down on a passing tray and straightened her posture. If you'll excuse me, I have a future to secure. Nathan smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Don't. Trip on your way up. She turned without another word, leaving him standing there, alone, defeated, irrelevant. And for the first time in years, Emily felt truly free. The night air was crisp as Emily stepped out of the event hall, her heels clicking against the polished pavement. She took a deep breath, letting the cool breeze wash over her. She expected to feel relief, satisfaction. Instead, there was something else. Clarity. For years she had been defined by the past, by her mistakes, by Nathan. But standing here, away from the echoes of the night's power games, she realized something powerful. None of it controlled her anymore. Her phone buzzed in, her purse, a message from Daniel. Daniel, how did it go? Still standing. Emily smiled. Daniel had been a breath of fresh air in her life, a stark contrast to the manipulation and toxicity she had once mistaken for love. He didn't try to control her. He didn't make her feel small. He simply supported her, she typed back quickly. Emily. Better than expected. Feels like a new beginning. A moment later, his reply popped up. Daniel. Sounds like a celebration is in order. Drinks? She hesitated, just for a second. Not because she was unsure about Daniel, but because for the first time, her future was completely hers. No regrets, no guilt, no looking back. Emily slipped her phone into her purse and hailed a cab. As she settled into the back seat, she glanced out the window at the city lights. Bright, dazzling, full of endless possibilities. To new beginnings, she whispered to herself as the car pulled away, and this time she meant it.